Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to pick up where my colleague Mr. Shaw's left off. I wasn't going to wade into the debate around whether this is a levy or a tax, because actually I think it's irrelevant, and as Labor members and others have gone into in quite some detail, when you look in the various dictionaries online and otherwise and Google them, it seems that the one is the other and the other is the one. So what it's called doesn't actually matter. It is significant, though, if we look at the Departmental Disclosure Statement, Mr. Chair, on page 9, Part 4, Significant Legislative Features, 4.2. Does this bill create or amend a power to impose a fee, levy or charge in the nature of a tax? And their answer is no. The explanation is that the levy is not proposed to be greater than cost recovery, and there will be a clear relation to the costs of the functions performed. The funds collected will be held in a trust account to be used solely for funding the costs of the levied services. Given this, officials consider the levy is not in the nature of a tax. So whether it's regarded as a tax or a levy, and there's obviously some difference in the mind of government, or at least in the minds of the officials who drafted this particular statement. That aside, Mr. Chair, it raises a question, and it goes back to a theme that I've raised in earlier stages of this debate. When we say the funds collected will be held in a trust account, if we, by a little stretch, presume that the consolidated fund, for example, is a trust account, because in a manner it is, to be used solely for funding the cost of the levied services, one would presume, or I guess one could be forgiven for presuming, that the purpose of government raising tax at all, or raising revenue at all through whatever means, would be to fund the cost of levied services. In other words, the things that government does, it has to raise money for. And I don't see that there's a difference in that regard between money being raised for a purpose specific to government and money being raised by government specific to a purpose. What it does get back to is, and this is the point that I've been making, and the one that Mr. Shaw picked up on as well, was the $100 million which this levy, tax, fee, whatever, is intended to raise. Is this going to be additional to baseline funding for biosecurity as it currently exists, or not? Because, and this is fundamental to our support or lack of it for this bill, Mr. Chair, because if we're talking about $100 million extra dollars going on top of what we currently spend on biosecurity, we're all for that, and that'll swing us round, and we'll come in behind it and we'll say, good on you, Minister. The Minister has made a point over his time as the Minister of saying that biosecurity is his #1 priority. We absolutely support him in that, because, and in fairness, I think he's genuine in that. He may struggle, I think, at times to extract a sufficient degree of priority out of his Cabinet colleagues for the primary sector, because their focus may be in other areas. But I think he's genuine in wanting to improve the level of biosecurity. We may disagree on the methodology by which that's achieved and the processes that they intend to go through. But doubling the budget that's available for biosecurity would make an enormous difference to whether or not New Zealand First could support this bill. And I think it really does require some absolute clarity as to whether or not this levy, and it is a new levy, is going to provide an additional stream of funding for biosecurity, or whether it's going to replace the current stream of funding for biosecurity. And again, I come back to the point that the Minister of Customs made earlier, talking about cost recovery, whereas Minister Foss and Mr McKelvey have talked about boosts. Either it's a boost or it's a cost recovery. It's one or the other. So either we're talking about another $100 million or the same $100 million coming from somewhere else, and that's really quite crucial. So, yeah, I know that yes, people have said extra, and other people have said cost recovery. So it's one or the other. And I wonder if perhaps then, if we want to go back to the title of the bill, if we could say that it should be called the Border Processing Arrivals and Departures Additional Levy Bill, and that would clarify that completely to say that whether this is additional funding or not. I also want to ask another question, and I'm certainly hoping that some government members are going to rise and take calls in this stage of the debate, Mr. Chair, or perhaps they're just leaving it for the Minister or Ministers at the end. If it is simply cost recovery, and we look at some of perhaps the fringe pathways through which people and goods and so forth come into New Zealand, but we know that it's about 95% of the incoming passengers are airline passengers, about 4% are cruise ship passengers, and the other 1% are yachts and private jets and military personnel and so forth. Never mind, there are diplomatic visitors and so forth, guests of government, who we already know from prior government statements will be exempt because it's not appropriate to charge guests of the government money to come in. But if we are talking about solely cost recovery, then I can't see that it's, Mr. Chair.
Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't see that it's feasible in any way to imagine that for $16 a person, it warrants sending an inspector up to, say, Opah in the Bay of Islands to inspect the crew of a yacht coming in. It cannot materially, physically be possible to adequately, properly inspect a number of people coming in on a yacht and that yacht itself at $16 a head. So that in itself begs the question, if the levy isn't sufficient for these sort of things, is it going to be topped up from general government funding? And if that's going to be the case, is that going to be across the board? And can we please have some clarification from the Minister or from one of the government members as to whether or not that's going to be the case? Thank you.